The Dark Angels have been through a lot in the last 10,000 years. Don't get me wrong, they deserved quite a bit of it, but the then Legion, now Chapter, has seen some changes since their inception. Once clad in midnight black armor, they now sport dark green hues to honor their mostly destroyed home of Caliban. Problem is, I'm not a huge fan of forest green, and I think the Black Knight aesthetic fits the Dark Angels much better. But at the same time, the modern Dark Angel aesthetic is classic, and it does offer some unique features compared to other chapters. So today, why don't we work to combine both the old and the new Dark Angels colors to come up with an army scheme that fits the medieval aesthetic, as well as honors both the 30k and 40k lore. My name's Colt, this is Gone Hollow Minis, and today we're coming up with our own unique Deathwing color scheme. Now, naturally, this idea starts with some lore, both homebrew and canon. At the end of the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angels radically changed their color scheme and chapter identity both. They doused their armor in dark green paint to honor their homeworld, and became obsessed with hunting down the Fallen, who they blamed for their father's death and their legion's end. But now, of course, we know their dad's not dead, and with the Lion's return, we see him reconciling with his fallen sons. My goal for this color scheme is to show the Dark Angels overcoming their millennia of guilt, reconnecting with their past, forgiving their own sins, and stepping with their father into their new identity as defenders of the Lion's Protectorate. And I think the most obvious model to start working with this is a Deathwing Knight. I was able to get on that Dark Angel Battle Force last Christmas, so I have a few of these guys knocking around to work with. I want to try working with two miniatures here, one standard Terminator and one Sergeant, or Knightmaster. Having the Sergeant to work with here will not only give me a more Greeble-heavy model to work with, but it'll also give me some practice on figuring out how to make certain units and Sergeants stand out a little bit more from the rest of the rank and file. I have a couple ideas on that already, but we'll see how that shakes out later. But okay, now that we've got our models picked out, let's think about what colors we want to work with. First and most important, I want the base armor to be black. These are Dark Angels after all, and I do have a soft spot for black and red Space Marines. Speaking of, the accent color for the 30k color scheme is red, which is a really nice and bright color choice against our black. Now onto the 40k colors. The accent color is an off-white bone color. This is pretty neutral and shouldn't be too hard to incorporate. Some 30k units, like the Deathwing Companions, already have this color present in their palette. But the predominant color of 40k Dark Angels is, of course, green. With the colors we've already got, this could be a little bit tricky. Since we've already got red as one of our accents, we'll have to be pretty careful on how we include our green in our color palette, as the two can clash pretty garishly. But we can work on that a bit later. For now, let's just start with our base black armor. As I'm planning this, I'm also thinking about which elements would look best in bone. The Deathwing Companions paint their armor bone wherever they've taken a severe wound in defense of the person they're guarding. Not only is this a cool lore detail, it's also a unique way to work in the classic Deathwing bone color. Now, I've already gone over my black armor recipe once before in detail, but I've made a couple tweaks since then, so we'll go over it quickly here. It starts with a ruddy brown base coat over a black primer. Don't go too dark with this, since we want it to contrast with how dark our armor will be. From there, we're going to apply regular black paint. This will be applied with a sponge over our armor panels, leaving a bit of red showing at the edges and in the recesses. Texture is the name of the game here, so leave these red edges kind of rough and ragged. Next, we're going to apply Vallejo German Grey much the same way. This will be somewhat subtle, but subtle is good when you're not spending any time blending. This will start to build up our highlights, so pay attention to where you're applying this. Don't completely cover the previous black layer, and focus this on the higher parts of the miniature that would catch more light. Lastly, we're going to mix a bit of Army Painter Night Sky into our Vallejo German Grey. This will lighten our paint, but keep the color more interesting than if we had just added white. If you want more info on the theory behind that, check out the video I made that was dedicated to black armor. But make sure this is a really specific, focused highlight. As we're stippling or sponging this on, make sure it's only going on the highest, brightest parts of the mini. And unlike in the full video I did on black armor, this is where we're going to end our layers. I have a bad habit of pushing it a little bit too bright and a little bit too blue, so to play it safe, we're going to go ahead and end here. Now, there's a little bit more cleanup work to do on the armor, but don't worry, we can get to that later once we have a few more of our armor colors established. Now just to finish up those bone sections. This includes the armor sections we left out, as well as parts of the shields. When I can, I like to include some sort of medieval looking pattern here. These are examples of heraldic devices, and can really push the medieval theme of the Dark Angels. That said, I have gone into detail on this recipe before, and unlike the black armor, it hasn't changed much since then. So check out that video if you're looking for a more in-depth dive. Okay, so that leaves us with our armor done. Now just to figure out all those detail and accent colors we've been thinking about. On these minis in particular, we've got some solid options. The chapter symbols, chest details, and robes are all big and noticeable, and would be a great place to work in some of those colors. This is the standard knight, and I'm thinking that red robes would look good here. It kind of fits the standard look for Heresy-era Dark Angels, and looks good without standing out too much, if that makes sense. Just like the black armor, I've already gone over these kinds of techniques in depth, but we'll go over them quickly here. For these colors, I'm going for a cooler red tone. I think going warmer with oranges might stand out a bit too much, so I'll start with an even base coat of Wordbearer's red. Next, we'll move up to Mephiston red. This will be applied using a brush, making a ton of scratchy movements to emulate the weave of the fabric. After that, I'll mix in a bit of Army Painter Pure Red, and then Pure Red. Then the last two layers are a mix of Pure Red and Blood Chalice, and Pure Blood Chalice. Now for the chapter symbol on the pauldron and the Deathwing symbol on the chest. I want to keep the red color while still making them stand out, and we'll do this by introducing a different surface finish. You might have seen this in my video about my Blood Angel Captain diorama base, and it's pretty much the same technique. We're first going to paint these details with metallics. I'm using Vallejo metal color steel, silver, and aluminum. We're pretty much going to highlight these as usual, except that the aluminum color is a bit brighter than I would normally like to go. Once that's done, we'll use Army Painter Blood Red Speed Paint to give these elements a unique metallic look that'll really help them stand out against the black armor. On my Knight Master, I'm taking a slightly different approach. I want him to really stand out on the tabletop because he has a different weapon, and it makes sense that the Sergeant would be a little bit flashier anyway. I want to take the chance with him to work in some of those green tones into our color scheme. By cutting out the red robe, we have a bit more freedom to play with our green tones, not having to worry about clashing Christmassy colors and all. The technique here pretty much matches the red robe, just with a few different colors, obviously. That's great and all on the Knight Master, but what about our regular Deathwing Knight? We still want some green tones on him, but we do have to be a little bit more careful. Not that red and green is always a bad color combo, it's just pretty loaded with connotations and associations, which isn't always what you want. Part of the answer here, I think, is heraldry. We already talked about this a little bit on our shield, but including heraldry on things like our tilt shields can help to both make our miniatures feel more individual, as well as offer opportunities to work in some more carefully placed accent colors. This is also a good spot to stretch your painting legs. Painting tight, clean patterns is a great way to show off on your minis, and these tilt shields are a great place to do that. Not to mention this, along with carefully picking out details like dagger sheaths, can help work in those iconic Dark Angels colors while keeping the whole scheme a little bit more cohesive. One last opportunity here afforded to us by our 30k inspiration. A lot of helmet designs in 30k have different markings and patterns to show different ranks and veterancies. Ones that stood out to me from the graphics I've found are a red stripe down the forehead and painting the lower visor in gold. But that's most of the legwork done. From here, it's pretty much just finishing up the standard details. Pauldron trim, some wear and tear on the armor panels, things like that. Once we catch up with those, our Deathwing Knights should be pretty much done, and might look something like this. Mixing color schemes, especially for a faction like Dark Angels, can be a really interesting way to make your army feel unique. It's kind of the best of both worlds. You're sticking to the lore that so many of us love, albeit in your own way, while also coming up with a color scheme that's unique to many other Dark Angels armies out there. On top of that, it's your chance to take your Dark Angels in a direction you want them to go. It's a unique blending of canon and homebrew that might be harder to portray on the tabletop with a totally homebrew color scheme. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video gave you a new perspective on Dark Angels or even just your chapter of choice. If it did, or you just found a part of this video useful, feel free to like, share, and drop a comment. I'll be engaging with as many as I can. If you enjoyed, why not subscribe to stick around? I'd love to have you along for the ride. But regardless, until next time friends, be safe, be kind, and of course, don't you dare go hollow.